What happens when a broken billionaire saves a mysterious teacher from a deadly Christmas blizzard, only to discover she holds the key to his darkest secret in the frozen wilderness of Montana? 1885. Nathaniel Cross has spent 5 years hiding from the world after losing his wife and daughter. But when he pulls Isabella Hayes from the snow on Christmas Eve, their lives become forever intertwined in ways neither could imagine. This story will take you through betrayal, hidden love, and the healing power of second chances. Like and subscribe if you believe in Christmas miracles, because what unfolds next will restore your faith in love's ability to conquer even the deepest pain. That's my daughter's song. When Millionaire heard Teacher's lullaby, his heart shattered. The howling wind carried death across the Montana plains, and Nathaniel Cross welcomed it like an old friend. Standing at the frost-covered window of Cross Creek Ranch, he watched the Christmas Eve blizzard tear through the valley with the fury of a wounded beast. Snow devils danced between the skeletal cottonwoods, their ghostly forms reminding him of all the spirits that haunted this place. 44 years old, and he felt ancient. The untouched brandy in his glass reflected the firelight like liquid amber. But even whiskey had lost its power to numb the ache that lived in his chest. 5 years since the train accident that took Catherine and 7-year-old Lily, leaving him with nothing but an empire of cattle and an ocean of guilt. Mr. Cross, old Pete's weathered face, appeared in the doorway, his gray mustache dusted with snow from his evening rounds. The ranch foreman had been like a father to Nathan since he was 12, and at 73, Pete was one of the few souls brave enough to disturb his employer's brooding. The men are all settled in the bunkhouse for the night. Pete continued stamping his boots. This storm's going to be a killer. Haven't seen one this fierce since the winter of '79. Nathan nodded without turning from the window. Outside, the world had become a swirling void of white and shadow. Any word from town, telegraph lines are down, we're cut off until this blows over. Pete hesitated, his pale blue eyes studying Nathan's rigid profile. Sir, it's Christmas Eve. Maybe you should. Should what, Pete? Nathan's voice was soft but carried an edge sharp enough to cut glass. Celebrate, deck the halls, sing carols. He finally turned, and Pete saw the familiar desolation that had lived in those green eyes since the funeral. My family is dead. Christmas died with them. Pete's weathered features softened with compassion. He'd watched this brilliant, generous man slowly transform into a ghost, haunting his own life. The Nathan Cross who once filled this house with laughter, who'd built schools and funded churches across 3 counties, who'd loved his wife and daughter with a fierce tenderness. That man had been buried with them in Willow Hill Cemetery. They wouldn't want this for you, Pete said quietly. Miss Catherine and little Lily, they'd want you to. A sharp crack from outside cut him off. Both men froze, listening. Through the storm's roar came another sound, the unmistakable splintering of wood and a horse's panicked scream. Nathan was moving before his mind caught up, grabbing his heavy coat and hat from the hooks by the door. Stay here, Pete. Keep the fire burning. Sir, you can't go out in this. It's suicide. But Nathan was already pushing through the door into the teeth of the storm. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and sending ice crystals into his lungs. The wind was a living thing, clawing at his coat and trying to lift him off his feet. Snow stung his face like buckshot as he fought his way toward the sound. His boots sank deep with each step, the drifts already knee-high and building. The ranch house disappeared behind him, within yards swallowed by the white curtain. Only the fence line guided him, his gloved hands trailing along the rails as he pushed forward into the storm's heart. Then he saw it, a dark shape against the snow barely visible through the driving flakes. A wagon overturned and half buried. One wheel spun lazily in the wind, and nearby a horse thrashed weakly in a snowdrift, its harness tangled and broken. Nathan's heart hammered as he fought through the deeper snow. Who would be fool enough to travel in this weather? As he drew closer, his blood turned to ice. A woman lay motionless beside the wreckage. Her dark coat a stark contrast against the white ground. Snow was already beginning to cover her still form. Ma'am? His voice was torn away by the wind, but he dropped to his knees beside her, brushing snow from her face with frantic hands. She was young, perhaps 30, with delicate features and skin pale as porcelain. Her lips held the blue tinge of hypothermia, and her breathing was so shallow he had to lean close to detect it. Can you hear me? He gathered her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt. Her head lolled against his chest, dark hair spilling from beneath her simple bonnet. Something about her face nagged at him, a whisper of familiarity he couldn't place. The woman's eyelids fluttered, and for a moment, brown eyes the color of autumn leaves gazed up at him with confusion. "The children," she whispered through chattering teeth. "The presents. For the children." Nathan followed her gaze to the scattered contents of the wagon. Wooden toys, hand-knitted scarves, small wrapped parcels, all being rapidly buried by the storm. Someone's Christmas destroyed by nature's fury. "We'll worry about that later," he said, lifting her more securely. "Right now, we need to get you warm." The journey back to the house was a nightmare of stumbling steps and driving snow. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling about children and Christmas and someone named Sarah. Nathan's muscles burned with effort as he fought the wind, using the fence line as his lifeline back to safety. Old Pete had the door open before Nathan reached the porch, his face creased with worry and relief. "Lord Almighty, is she alive?" "Barely." Nathan carried her straight to the parlor where the fire crackled warmly. "Get blankets, hot water, and send someone for Dr. Mitchell if the roads are passable." "Roads ain't passable for nobody tonight, sir. We're on our own until morning at the earliest." Nathan gently laid the woman on the leather sofa, his hands shaking as he began removing her wet coat and boots. Her feet were like ice, and he feared frostbite had already set in. Pete returned with an armload of quilts and a basin of warm water. "What fool woman would be out in a storm like this?" Pete muttered, helping to wrap her in the blankets. "Someone delivering Christmas presents to children." Nathan replied gently, chafing her hands between his own. "From what I could see in the wagon." As warmth began to return to her extremities, the woman stirred more frequently. Her eyes opened again, focusing on Nathan's face with growing awareness. She tried to sit up, wincing, as pain shot through her left ankle. "Easy," Nathan said, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "You've been hurt. Your wagon overturned in the storm." "The children at Pine Ridge," she said, her voice stronger now, but edged with distress. "They're expecting. It's Christmas Eve. They have so little, and I promised." Tears gathered in her eyes, whether from pain or disappointment, Nathan couldn't tell. "Pine Ridge Settlement," Pete asked, recognition dawning. "That's near 20 miles through the worst country." "Miss, what's your name?" She hesitated, as if unsure whether to trust these strangers. Finally, she said, "Isabella Hayes. I teach at the Pine Ridge School. The children there, their families have almost nothing. I was bringing them presents, just small things, but you risked your life for some toys." The words came out harsher than Nathan intended, driven by a fear he didn't understand. "That was foolish." Isabella's chin lifted with a dignity that impressed him, despite her bedraggled state. "Those children have never had a real Christmas, Mr. Cross, Nathaniel Cross." Something flickered in her eyes at the name. Recognition farce, it passed so quickly he wasn't sure. "Mr. Cross, when you have nothing, hope is everything. Sometimes a simple gift can change a child's entire world." The words hit Nathan like a physical blow. He could hear Lily's voice so clear it might have been yesterday. "Papa, can we give presents to the children who don't have any? Mama says Christmas is about sharing our love." "Sir," Pete's concerned voice broke through the memory. "You all right?" Nathan realized he'd been staring at Isabella Hayes with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. He stood abruptly, turning to pace before the fire. "Your ankle appears to be sprained, not broken. Pete will prepare a room for you. The storm should pass by morning, and then we'll see about getting you back to town." "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose." "It's not kindness, Miss Hayes. It's necessity. You'll die if you go back out there tonight." Isabella studied his profile as he stood silhouetted against the fireplace. Even in the warm glow, there was something cold and remote about Nathaniel Cross, as if he held himself separate from the world. She'd heard whispers about the Cross Creek ranch owner, the tragic widower who'd become a recluse after losing his family. Looking at him now, she could see the truth of those stories in the rigid set of his shoulders and the careful distance he maintained. But she'd also seen something else in his eyes when he carried her from the storm, a flash of the man he'd been before grief carved him hollow. "I'm grateful for your hospitality," she said quietly, "and I apologize for the trouble." Nathan turned back to her, and for a moment their gazes held. In the firelight, with her dark hair loose around her shoulders and those warm brown eyes reflecting the flames, Isabella thick. Hayes was lovely in a way that made his chest tight with unwelcome awareness. "Pete will bring you some supper and help you to your room," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "If you need anything during the night, ring the bell on the nightstand." He was already moving toward the door when her voice stopped him. "Mr. Cross, thank you for saving my life." Nathan paused without turning around. Anyone would have done the same. But as he climbed the stairs to his own cold bedroom, Nathan knew that wasn't true. 5 years ago, he might have been the man to risk everything for a stranger. Tonight, he'd acted on instinct alone, and he wasn't sure what that meant. In the guest room, Isabella lay awake long after old Pete had settled her for the night. The ankle throbbed and her body ached from the cold and trauma, but it was her mind that wouldn't rest. She kept seeing Nathaniel Cross's face in the moment he'd pulled her from the snow, the desperate relief when he'd found her alive, as if saving her had somehow saved a piece of himself. She knew who he was, of course. Everyone in 3 counties knew the story of Nathan Cross and his family's tragic death. But seeing him in person, she'd recognize something more than his reputation. In his eyes and the careful way he'd tended her injuries, she'd glimpsed the shadow of a man she'd once known from a distance. A man whose little daughter had once been the brightest light in Isabella's classroom. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside Cross Creek Ranch, 2 damaged souls had found temporary shelter from their separate storms. Neither knew that by morning their lives would be forever changed by secrets that were about to surface from the snow-covered past. The fire crackled lower as the night deepened, and somewhere in the darkness, between sleep and waking, Isabella could have sworn she heard a child's laughter echoing through the halls, sweet and innocent like a ghost of Christmas past, calling them both home. Dawn broke gray and muted over Cross Creek Ranch, the world transformed into a crystalline wonderland that stretched endlessly in all directions. Isabella woke to silence so profound it seemed to press against her eardrums, broken only by the distant sound of men's voices and the scrape of shovels against snow. Her ankle throbbed as she tested it gingerly, but the swelling had gone down overnight. Through the frost-etched window, she could see figures moving through the drifts, ranch hands digging paths between buildings, their breath steaming in the bitter air. The storm had passed, leaving behind snow so deep it reached the lower windows of the house. A soft knock interrupted her observations. "Miss Hayes," old Pete's gravelly voice carried through the door. "I've brought you some breakfast and hot coffee. Please come in." Pete entered with a tray that made Isabella's eyes widen. Fresh biscuits, thick slices of ham eggs, a coffee that smelled like heaven itself. After months of making do with simple fare, such abundance felt almost sinful. "This is too much," she protested, but Pete waved her concerns away. "Mr. Cross insists his guests are properly fed. Besides, you need your strength after last night's ordeal." As Isabella ate, Pete busied himself stoking the fire and checking that she had everything she needed. There was a kindness in his weathered features that spoke of a man who'd spent his life caring for others. "How long have you worked for Mr. Cross?" she asked between bites of the fluffiest biscuit she'd ever tasted. Pete's eyes grew distant. "Near 32 years now. Knew him when he was just a scrappy 12-year-old fresh from Boston after his folks died. Watched him build this empire from nothing but determination and dreams. He seems," Isabella searched for the right word, "alone. Weren't it always that way?" Pete settled into the chair by the fire, his voice taking on the cadence of a man with stories to tell. "Time was, this house rang with laughter. Nathan was different then, full of life, generous to a fault. When he married, Miss Catherine brought her here as a bride. This place became a real home. And when little Lily came along," Pete's voice trailed off, and Isabella felt her heart clench. She remembered Lily Cross, a tiny girl with golden ringlets and her father's green eyes bright as sunshine and twice as warm. She must have been very special. Special don't begin to cover it. That little girl was the light of Nathan's world. Smart as a whip, kind as her mama, and fearless as her daddy. Pete's eyes misted with memory. She had this way of making everyone feel important, you know. From the lowest ranch hand to the fancy visitors from back east. Didn't matter to Lily. She saw the good in everybody. Isabella's throat tightened. She remembered that about Lily, too, the way she'd defended the quieter children, shared her lunch with those who had none, turned every lesson into an adventure with her boundless curiosity. The accident, Isabella said softly. It must have been devastating. Pete's face darkened. Changed everything. Nathan blamed himself, though it weren't his fault. Catherine and Lily were taking the train to visit Catherine's sister in Denver, supposed to be gone just a week. Nathan had business here, cattle contracts that couldn't wait. Said he should have gone with them, should have protected them somehow. But train accidents, they're no one's fault. Try telling Nathan that. Pete stood, the memories clearly painful. He's convinced himself that if he'd been there, he could have prevented it. Been eating at him for 5 years now, turning him bitter and cold. Breaks my heart to see what he's become. After Pete left, Isabella lay back against the pillows, her mind churning with memories she'd tried so hard to bury. She remembered the day she'd learned about the accident, the way her heart had shattered for the grieving widower she'd only known from a distance, and the bright little girl who would never again brighten her classroom. She'd written him a letter, then just one unsigned and sent through the postal service. A simple note of condolence from someone who knew how special Lily was. She'd never expected a response, never imagined he might have kept it. A commotion from downstairs interrupted her thoughts. Male voices, one she recognized as Nathan's, the other unfamiliar and somehow unpleasant. Isabella eased to the window, careful of her injured ankle, and peered down at the scene below. A sleek black carriage had somehow made it through the snow, pulled by 4 magnificent horses that stood steaming in the cold. Beside it stood a man in an expensive coat, tall, well-dressed with silver hair and features that might have been handsome if not for the calculating coldness in his pale eyes. Nathan stood on the front porch, his posture rigid with barely controlled tension. Even from her vantage point, Isabella could see the animosity crackling between the two men. Told you before, Whitmore, Nathan's voice carried clearly in the cold air. I'm not selling. Be reasonable, Nathan. The silver-haired man's tone was smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. The railroad wants this land, and they're prepared to pay handsomely, more than it's worth, frankly. Then they can want. Cross Creek Ranch isn't for sale. Thomas Whitmore, for Isabella was certain that's who this was, smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You can't run this place forever as a hermit, Nathan. You're hemorrhaging money, losing cattle, alienating business partners. How long before the bank comes calling? Long enough. Nathan's voice could have frozen the remaining snow. Now get off my land. Whitmore's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. You're making a mistake, Nathan. A costly one. The railroad gets what it wants one way or another. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Think about it. What happened to Catherine and Lily could happen to anyone. Accidents have a way of recurring. The silence that followed was so complete that Isabella could hear her own heartbeat. When Nathan spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. If you're implying what I think you're implying, Whitmore, I'll kill you where you stand. Whitmore laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Just stating facts, old friend. The world is a dangerous place. Now I'll give you 1 more week to reconsider my generous offer. After that, he shrugged elegantly. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. Isabella watched the carriage disappear into the snowy landscape, her mind reeling. Had Whitmore just threatened Nathan? And what had he meant about accidents recurring? A chill that had nothing to do with the weather ran down her spine. She was still pondering this when Nathan appeared in her doorway, his face a mask of controlled fury. I apologize for the disturbance, Miss Hayes. How are you feeling this morning? Better, thank you. My ankle is much improved. She studied his face, noting the tight lines around his eyes, the rigid set of his jaw. Is everything all right? Business matters, nothing for you to concern yourself with. But his dismissive tone didn't match the storm in his green eyes. I'm afraid the roads won't be passable for several days. You're welcome to stay until then. Isabella nodded, sensing this wasn't the time to probe deeper. I'm grateful for your hospitality. Perhaps I could help with something. I'm not used to being idle. Well, something flickered in Nathan's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or a grudging respect. Pete mentioned you're a teacher. Yes, at the Pine Ridge School. It's not much, just a 1-room building, but the children there are eager to learn. Pine Ridge. Nathan's voice grew thoughtful. That's rough country. Hard people. They're good people, Isabella said firmly. They've just had hard lives. The children especially deserve better. Nathan studied her with those penetrating green eyes, and Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks under his scrutiny. There was something about the way he looked at her, as if he was seeing past her surface to something deeper. "You risked your life for them," he said quietly, "for children who aren't even your own. They are mine in every way that matters. When you're a teacher, every child becomes part of your heart." The words seemed to hit Nathan like a physical blow. He stepped back, his face closing off again. "I'll have Pete bring you some books from the library to help pass the time." But as he turned to leave, Isabella found herself speaking without thinking. "Mr. Cross, the man who was here earlier, be careful around him. He doesn't seem like someone to trust." Nathan paused in the doorway, not turning around. "Thomas Whitmore is many things, Miss Hayes, but he's not your concern." "Maybe not, but I've learned to recognize predators, and that man," she shivered, "he's dangerous." This time Nathan did turn his expression unreadable. "You have good instincts, Miss Hayes. I'll keep that in mind." After he left, Isabella found herself wondering about the dynamics she'd witnessed. Whitmore had mentioned the railroad bank trouble, and most chilling of all, he'd made what sounded like a veiled reference to the accident that killed Nathan's family. Could there be more to that tragedy than anyone knew? The afternoon passed quietly, with Pete bringing her a selection of books from what was clearly an extensive library. She chose a volume of poetry and settled by the fire to read, but found her attention wandering to the sounds of the house around her. It was a large house built for a family, and the silence seemed to echo with ghosts. She could imagine it as it once was, filled with laughter and love, Christmas mornings bright with joy, a little girl's footsteps pattering through the halls. As evening approached, Pete appeared with another tray. "Mr. Cross thought you might be more comfortable taking dinner in your room," he explained, but Isabella shook her head. "Please, I'd like to join him in the dining room, if that's acceptable." Pete's weathered face brightened. "I think that would do him a world of good, miss. He hasn't shared a meal with another soul in longer than I care to remember." An hour later, Isabella made her way carefully downstairs, leaning on the banister for support. Her ankle was still tender, but manageable. She'd done what she could with her appearance, braiding her long, dark hair and smoothing the wrinkles from her simple dress. She found Nathan in the dining room, standing before a massive window that looked out over the snow-covered ranch. He'd changed into a fresh shirt and jacket, his dark hair combed back, and for a moment Isabella could see the man he'd been before tragedy marked him. "Miss Hayes?" He turned as she entered, and she caught a flash of something in his eyes. Appreciation, perhaps, or simple human warmth. "You shouldn't be walking on that ankle. It's healing well. And please call me Isabella. After all you've done, formality seems unnecessary." Nathan moved to help her into her chair, his touch gentle but brief. "Isabella, then. And I'm Nathan." The dining room was elegant but understated, with a long mahogany table that could easily seat 12. Tonight, only two places were set at one end of the table, creating an intimacy that made Isabella's pulse quicken unexpectedly. The meal Pete served was simple but expertly prepared. Roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables that had clearly been preserved from the ranch's own gardens. As they ate, Isabella found herself stealing glances at her host. In the candlelight, Nathan's harsh features were softened, and she could see traces of the man Pete had described, the generous soul who'd built schools and helped his community. But there was also a deep weariness about him, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Tell me about your school," Nathan said, suddenly surprising her with his interest. Isabella set down her fork, her face lighting up with passion. "It's not much to look at, just one room with a wood stove and about 20 desks that have seen better days. But the children, Nathan, they're remarkable, so hungry to learn despite having so little." "What do you teach them?" "Everything. Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography. Some of the older children help with the younger ones. We have students from 6 to 16 all in one room." Nathan found himself drawn into her enthusiasm, watching the way her brown eyes sparkled as she talked about her students. "It sounds challenging." "It is, but it's also wonderful. When you see a child's face light up because they've finally grasped a difficult concept, or when a shy student finds their voice, there's nothing like it in the world." "You love them." The simple statement caught Isabella off guard. "Yes," she said quietly, "I do." They're not my children by blood, but they might as well be. Something shifted in Nathan's expression, a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. Catherine used to say something similar about her students. Before Lily was born, she taught at the school in town. It was the first time he'd voluntarily mentioned his wife, and Isabella felt the significance of it. She sounds like she was a wonderful woman. She was. Nathan's voice grew soft with memory. Kind, patient, endlessly generous. She saw the best in everyone, even when they couldn't see it themselves. And Lily, she must have been very much like her mother. Nathan's face tightened with pain, but he didn't shut down the conversation as Isabella expected. Instead, he seemed to be weighing his words carefully. Lily was special, bright, curious, fearless. She had this laugh that could light up a room, and she never met a stranger. Catherine used to worry she was too trusting, too open with her affections. Isabella's throat constricted. She remembered that laugh, remembered the way Lily would throw herself into every activity with complete abandon. Children like that are rare gifts. They were my world, Nathan said simply. When I lost them, I lost myself. The honesty in his voice made Isabella's heart ache. Without thinking, she reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. The contact was electric, sending warmth shooting up her arm, and Nathan's eyes widened with surprise. I'm sorry, she said, starting to pull back. But Nathan turned his hand palm up, catching her fingers in his. Don't be. His voice was rough with emotion. It's been a long time since I felt. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. In the candlelit silence, something fragile and precious bloomed between them. Understanding, connection, the first tentative reach toward healing. But the moment was shattered by the sound of breaking glass from somewhere deep in the house. Nathan was on his feet instantly, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun he wore even at dinner. Stay here, he commanded, but Isabella was already struggling to stand. Nathan, wait! He was gone, moving with a speed and purpose that spoke of old instincts and hard-learned caution. Isabella heard his boots on the hardwood floors, heard doors slamming open as he searched the house. Then silence. Too much silence. Despite her injured ankle and his orders to stay put, Isabella made her way carefully through the house following the path Nathan had taken. She found him in what was clearly his study, standing amid the wreckage of a shattered window. Cold air poured through the opening, and snow had already begun to accumulate on the scattered papers and broken glass. A tree branch, Nathan said without turning around. The wind must have brought it down. But Isabella could see what he was looking at, a large rock that lay among the debris with something wrapped around it. Nathan bent and picked it up, unfolding a piece of paper with hands that weren't quite steady. What does it say? Isabella asked softly. Nathan's face was stone as he read, but she could see the fury building behind his eyes. Finally, he looked up, and the cold rage in his expression made her step back. It's from Whitmore, he said, his voice deadly quiet. A reminder that accidents can happen to anyone, and that some people are easier to replace than others. The threat was clear, and Isabella felt ice form in her veins. He's threatening you. He's threatening you. Nathan's eyes met hers, and she saw fear there. Not for himself, but for her. He knows you're here, Isabella, and he's making it clear that your safety depends on my cooperation. The implications hit her like a physical blow. By saving her life, Nathan had inadvertently put her in danger. And by caring for her even briefly, he'd given Thomas Whitmore a weapon to use against him. I should leave, she said immediately. First thing in the morning, and I'll go back to town and... No. Nathan's voice was sharp with command. You're not going anywhere, not until I know you're safe. But if my being here puts you at risk... Isabella. Nathan crossed to her, his hands settling gently on her shoulders. I failed to protect Catherine and Lily. I won't fail to protect you. Looking up into his green eyes, Isabella saw the truth he'd been hiding. That her presence here meant more to him than he wanted to admit, that losing her now would be another wound his heart couldn't bear. Then we face this together, she said quietly. Nathan's hands tightened on her shoulders, and for a moment Isabella thought he might kiss her. The air between them crackled with tension and unspoken longing, with the promise of something that could heal them both. Instead, he stepped back, his expression shuddering. It will board up my window. You should get some rest. But as Isabella made her way back to her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The fragile piece of Cross Creek Ranch had been shattered long with that window, and she was no longer just a stranger seeking shelter from the storm. She was the woman Nathaniel Cross was prepared to protect, even if it cost him everything. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the ranch, Thomas Whitmore was planning his next move in a game where the stakes had just become deadly. Isabella woke before dawn to the sound of hammering. Through her window, she could see Nathan and old Pete boarding up the broken study window, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Even from a distance, she could read the tension in Nathan's shoulders, the way he moved with predatory alertness. A soft knock interrupted her observations. "Miss Isabella." It was Mrs. Morrison, the elderly housekeeper, who'd apparently arrived early despite the snow. "Mr. Cross asked me to bring you this." The woman handed her a folded note written in Nathan's bold handwriting. "Stay inside today. Don't go near the windows. Trust Pete with your life, but trust no one else." Isabella's blood chilled. The threat was escalating, and Nathan was taking no chances with her safety. She dressed quickly in the riding clothes Mrs. Morrison had brought. Clothes that had belonged to Catherine Cross, the older woman explained with gentle kindness. "They should fit well enough," Mrs. Morrison said, her faded blue eyes studying Isabella with curiosity. "You're about her size and the color suits you." The deep blue wool dress was beautifully made and fit as if tailored for her. But wearing a dead woman's clothes felt strange, almost like stepping into someone else's life. Downstairs, she found Nathan in the kitchen cleaning a rifle with methodical precision. Several other weapons lay on the table: pistols, ammunition, a wicked-looking knife. He looked up as she entered, his green eyes taking in the borrowed dress with an expression she couldn't read. "You look—" He cleared his throat, setting down the rifle. "The dress suits you." "Mrs. Morrison was very kind to lend it." Isabella hesitated. "I hope it doesn't pain you to see me wearing Catherine's things." Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his hands stilling on the weapon. Catherine would have wanted her things to be useful, not gathering dust in a closet. She was practical that way. "Tell me about Whitmore," Isabella said, settling into a chair across from him. "What hold does he have over you?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "Thomas Whitmore is what you might call a facilitator. He arranges things, land deals, business, partnerships, sometimes less savory transactions. He has connections with the railroad, the banks, certain government officials who prefer to stay in the shadows. And he wants your ranch. He wants the land the railroad needs to complete their northern route. Cross Creek Ranch sits right in the path of their planned expansion." Nathan resumed cleaning the rifle, his movements sharp with suppressed anger. "He's been pressuring me to sell for 2 years. Each time I refuse, the pressure increases." Isabella felt pieces clicking together in her mind. "The train accident. You don't think it was really an accident, do you?" Nathan's hands stilled completely. When he looked up, his eyes held a pain so raw it made her chest tight. "The train derailed just outside Denver. Official cause was listed as track failure, old rails that couldn't handle the weight. But the section that failed had been inspected just weeks before and declared sound." "You think Whitmore arranged it?" "I think Thomas Whitmore is capable of anything if the price is right, and making me more amenable to negotiation would certainly serve his purposes." The cold calculation of it made Isabella sick. "We have to expose him. With what proof? The man covers his tracks like a professional. And even if I could prove what he did, it won't bring Catherine and Lily back." Nathan's voice broke slightly on his daughter's name. Isabella reached across the table, covering his hands with hers. "But it could prevent him from hurting anyone else." Nathan stared down at their joined hands, and Isabella felt the tremor that ran through him. "I can't lose anyone else, Isabella. I won't survive it." The raw honesty in his voice made her heart ache. Without thinking, she stood and moved around the table, settling beside him on the bench. "You're not going to lose me." Nathan turned to face her, and suddenly they were achingly close. She could see the gold flecks in his green eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath against her cheek. "You don't understand what you mean to—" The kitchen door burst open, cutting off his words. Old Pete stumbled in his face, pale with alarm. "Nathan, we've got riders coming. At least 6 of them armed and moving fast." Nathan was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle. "Whitmore." "Can't tell yet, but they're flying Whitmore's colors, black horse, black coats." Pete's weathered hands shook as he reached for his own weapon. "What do you want to do?" Nathan's mind raced through options, all of them bad. 6 armed men against an elderly foreman and a rancher who hadn't been in a real fight in years. The ranch hands were scattered across the property too far away to help. Isabella. Nathan turned to her, his voice urgent. There's a root cellar beneath the pantry. Pete will show you. Stay there until... No. Isabella stood as well, her chin lifted with stubborn determination. I won't hide while you face this alone. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment Whitmore made that threat. Her brown eyes blazed with fierce resolve. I know how to shoot, Nathan. My father taught me when I was 12. Nathan stared at her, seeing something in her face that reminded him of Catherine's quiet courage, of Lily's fearless spirit. Despite everything screaming at him to protect her, to hide her away, he found himself nodding. Pete, give her the shotgun. Show her the best positions for cover. As Pete armed Isabella and explained the house's defensive positions, Nathan moved to the front windows. The riders were closer now, their horses dark shapes against the white snow. He counted 6, just as Pete had said, all carrying rifles and moving with military precision. But something was wrong. These weren't Whitmore's usual hired thugs. These men moved like professionals, like soldiers. And the leader? Nathan's blood turned to ice as he recognized the man at the head of the group. Marcus Webb, a gun for hire with a reputation for never leaving witnesses. If Whitmore had hired Webb, he wasn't planning to negotiate anymore. They're not here to talk, Nathan called to Pete and Isabella. Webb doesn't take prisoners. The riders had spread out now, surrounding the house with tactical precision. Nathan could see them taking positions behind the barn, the well house, anywhere that offered cover, and a clear shot at the windows. Then Webb's voice rang out across the snow, carrying clearly in the cold air. Nathan Cross, send out the woman and we'll make this quick and clean. Nathan felt rage flood through him, hot and cleansing. They wanted Isabella, wanted to use her as leverage against him, or worse, eliminate her as a witness to whatever they planned. Go to hell, Webb, Nathan shouted back. Webb's laughter was like breaking glass. Wrong answer, Cross. Boys, light it up. The first shot shattered the morning silence, bullets slamming into the house's thick log walls. Nathan returned fire, his rifle cracking as he aimed for the muzzle flashes behind the barn. Isabella had taken position at a side window, the shotgun steady in her hands, despite the chaos erupting around them. Pete was at the back door, watching for anyone trying to circle behind them. They're trying to flank us, he called over the gunfire. Nathan saw them too. 2 riders spurring their horses through the deep snow, trying to reach the kitchen entrance. He swung his rifle around, leading the first rider by 3 feet, and squeezed the trigger. The man tumbled from his saddle with a cry of pain, but the second rider made it to cover behind the woodshed. Nathan could see him dismounting, checking his weapons. In moments, he'd be at the back door. Pete, fall back to the main hall, Nathan commanded. Isabella, stay down. But even as he said it, Nathan saw the trap they were in. Webb and his men had them surrounded and outgunned. It was only a matter of time before they breached the house, and then a new sound cut through the gunfire, the thunder of hoofbeats coming fast from the direction of town. Nathan risked a glance through the window and saw a sight that made his heart leap with desperate hope. Sheriff Bill Morrison and a dozen deputies riding hard through the snow with weapons drawn. Someone had gotten word to them, though Nathan couldn't imagine how. Webb saw them too. His voice rose above the gunfire, sharp with command. Mount up, we're pulling out. But Sheriff Morrison wasn't about to let them escape. This is Sheriff Morrison. You're surrounded. Throw down your weapons. What followed was a brief, vicious firefight in the snow. Webb and his remaining men tried to shoot their way out, but they were caught in crossfire between the house and the sheriff's posse. When the shooting stopped, 3 of Whitmore's men lay dead in the snow, 2 were wounded and captured, and Webb himself had taken a bullet in the shoulder. Nathan emerged from the house with his rifle still ready, Isabella close behind him. His eyes swept the scene, cataloging the dead and wounded, ensuring the threat was truly over. Sheriff Morrison dismounted, his weathered face grim. Nathan, you all right? And the lady? We're fine, Bill. How did you know to come? Morrison's eyes flicked to something behind Nathan, and he turned to see a young man approaching on horseback, barely 18, with familiar features and determined eyes. Tommy Morrison, Isabella breathed. One of my students. The young man nodded to her with obvious relief. Miss Hayes, when you didn't come back from Pine Ridge yesterday, we got worried. I rode out before dawn to look for you, saw these men heading this way with guns. He looked at Nathan with newfound respect. Figured you might need help. Nathan felt something unlock in his chest, gratitude so profound it left him shaken. This boy, one of Isabella's students, had risked his life to save them. The community she'd spoken of with such love had come through when it mattered most. Sheriff Morrison was reading Marcus Webb his rights when the sound of another carriage approached. Nathan's jaw tightened as he recognized Thomas Whitmore's elegant vehicle, the man himself stepping out with his usual composed smile. Sheriff Morrison, what a tragic misunderstanding, Whitmore said smoothly. I'm sure if we just save it, Whitmore. Nathan stepped forward, his rifle still in his hands. Webb's already talking. Seems you promised him quite a bonus for eliminating witnesses. Whitmore's mask finally slipped, revealing the calculating predator beneath. You can't prove anything, Cross. Webb is a known criminal. Who's going to believe his word against mine? Maybe this will help. Everyone turned at the sound of the new voice. Old Pete stood in the doorway of the house holding a leather satchel that Nathan had never seen before. The elderly foreman's face was grave as he approached. Found this hidden in the barn, Sheriff. Looks like correspondence, financial records, that sort of thing. Nathan watched as Sheriff Morrison opened the satchel, his expression growing darker with each document he examined. Well, looks like Mr. Whitmore's been keeping some interesting records, including payments to Marcus Webb dating back 5 years. Whitmore's face went white. Those are forgeries I've never seen, including, Morrison continued, a very detailed plan for sabotaging a certain train route in 1880, with a specific date and location that matched the accident that killed Catherine and Lily Cross. The world went silent around Nathan. He stared at the papers in Morrison's hands, seeing his worst fears confirmed in black and white. Whitmore hadn't just threatened his family. He'd murdered them. The rage that filled Nathan then was unlike anything he'd ever felt. Pure white-hot fury that made his vision blur and his hands shake with the need for vengeance. He raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Whitmore's heart. Nathan, no, Isabella's voice cut through the red haze. He's not worth it. Don't let him make you a killer. Nathan's finger tightened on the trigger, every fiber of his being screaming for justice, for blood, for the satisfaction of watching Thomas Whitmore die. But Isabella's hand settled gently on his arm, her touch anchoring him to something better than revenge. Catherine and Lily wouldn't want this, she said softly. They'd want justice, not murder. The truth of her words hit Nathan like cold water. Slowly he lowered the rifle, though his eyes never left Whitmore's face. Sheriff, arrest this man for conspiracy to commit murder. As Morrison's deputies slapped handcuffs on Whitmore, the man's composure finally cracked completely. You think this ends at Cross? You think taking me down solves anything? There are others bigger players than me. This is just the beginning. But Nathan was no longer listening. He turned to Isabella, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time since he'd pulled her from the snow. Her dark hair had come loose from its braid during the gunfight, framing her face like a halo. Her brown eyes held tears. For him, for his pain, for the justice finally served. It's over, he said quietly, and she nodded, understanding that he meant more than just the immediate danger. As the sheriff's posse prepared to leave with their prisoners, Pete approached Nathan with a knowing smile. Funny thing about that satchel, the old foreman said quietly. Found it in Whitmore's carriage, not the barn. Man was careless leaving evidence lying around like that. Nathan stared at his oldest friend, understanding dawning. Pete, you old fox. How long have you been investigating this? Since the day Catherine and Lily died. Knew in my gut that train derailment weren't no accident. Been gathering evidence ever since, waiting for the right moment. Pete's eyes were bright with satisfaction. Seeing you with Miss Isabella here, seeing you coming back to life. Figured it was time to lay the past to rest so you could have a future. The words hit Nathan like a revelation. He'd been so focused on his guilt and grief that he'd never considered the possibility of a future beyond mere survival. But looking at Isabella, now seeing the warmth and strength and love in her eyes, he could suddenly envision something he'd thought impossible. A second chance at happiness. Isabella, he began, but she placed her fingers gently against his lips. There's something I need to tell you first, she said, her voice trembling with nerves. Something I should have said the moment I recognized you. Nathan's heart stopped. Recognize me? Isabella took a shaky breath. I was Lily's teacher, Nathan, for 6 months before the accident. She was She was the brightest light in my classroom, just as she was in your life. The world tilted around Nathan. Suddenly, her familiarity made sense. Not just her face, but her mannerisms, her way of speaking about children, even the lullaby she'd hummed while recovering from the cold. You wrote to me, he said, the memory surfacing like a bubble breaking the surface of water. After the funeral, a letter about how special Lily was. Tears spilled down Isabella's cheeks. I wanted to help somehow to let you know that your daughter had touched other lives too. But I signed it as someone who knew how special Lily was, because I didn't think you'd remember me. Nathan's hands framed her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. Remember you, Isabella? Lily talked about you constantly. Miss Hayes said this. Miss Hayes taught us that. You were one of her favorite people in the world. I loved her, Isabella whispered, and I grieved for her, for both of them. When I saw your pain yesterday, I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid you'd think I was taking advantage. Nathan silenced her with a kiss, pouring 5 years of grief and loneliness and hope into the connection between them. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. She brought us together, Nathan said wonderfully. Somehow, someway, Lily brought you back to me. Isabella smiled through her tears. She always was determined to help everyone find their happiness. As they stood in the snow-covered yard of Cross Creek Ranch, surrounded by the evidence of the morning's violence, but also by the promise of justice served, Nathan felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years. Peace. The ghosts of his past could finally rest, and the future stretched before him, bright with possibility. 6 months later, Nathan and Isabella were married in the small church in town, with old Pete, Nathan's best man, and half of Pine Ridge Settlement in attendance. The children Isabella had been trying to reach with Christmas gifts were there too, their faces bright with joy for their beloved teacher. As they exchanged vows, Nathan could have sworn he heard the sound of a child's laughter on the wind, sweet and pure and full of love. Lily's blessing on their new beginning. Cross Creek Ranch came alive again, filled with the laughter of visiting students and the warmth of a love that had survived the worst storms life could bring. And when Isabella gave birth to their daughter the following Christmas, they named her Hope, for the future they'd found together and for the little girl who'd made it all possible. In the end, love had conquered grief, justice had defeated corruption, and two damaged souls had found healing in each other's arms. It was exactly the kind of Christmas miracle that Lily Cross would have believed in, and exactly the happy ending her father finally deserved. Thank you so much for joining Nathan and Isabella on their journey from heartbreak to healing. Their story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, love has the power to transform our lives in ways we never imagined possible. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales of love, redemption, and second chances. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from our viewers about which moments moved you most. What story should we tell next? Let us know what kind of romance you'd like to hear, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, remember that every ending is also a new beginning, and love always finds a way. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.